Hi, and welcome to Fantastic Books and How to Write Them. Today's lesson is on the importance of context when reading outside our own times. So, I recently submitted a short story that directly referenced Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. The allusion was an apt one, as the antagonist was largely inspired by its villain, Shylock. An editor very politely advised I remove the mere mention of this character, lest it be misconstrued as anti-Semitic. Shylock is, in many respects, a reflection of the rampant anti-Semitism of Elizabethan England. But to suggest that this character is beneath our narrative notice for the crime of affronting our modern sensibilities is an albeit well-meaning mistake. When we view The Merchant of Venice, or indeed Othello, through a modern lens, we cannot ignore the vilification of, nor the elevation of Christianity over othered Abrahamic faiths. This was a cultural and political paradigm typified by legally enforceable religious observation. Shakespeare lived in a time when religion was law. Prior to his King's Men's Company's patronage under King James I, who authorized the first English translation of the Bible, Shakespeare was a member of the Lord Chamberlain's men during the reign of the Protestant Queen Elizabeth. The Politics of Religion and the Religion of Politics in Elizabethan England by Patrick Collinson describes the theocratic landscape of Shakespeare's day. Collinson says, Elizabeth modeled herself on the biblical figure of Melchizedek, who was both priest and king. She was not an Ayatollah. Yet, by her authority and that of the parliament of which she was the principal member, every one of her subjects was legally bound to be present at the liturgical services of the church, twice on every Sunday and holy day, services which were constructed in minute detail in a book of common prayer, which, in the eyes of the law, was no more than an appendix to an act of parliament, the Act of Uniformity of 1559. Absence from church and any deviation from the forms and rubrics of that book were statutory offenses and attracted the secular penalties of fine and imprisonment, penalties sharply increased by a further Act of Parliament in 1581. Other religious and ecclesiastical misdemeanors invited excommunication. That was a religious matter, but it had political and social implications. So far was religion from being private or voluntary that you could be put to death by incineration for the simple offense of holding beliefs which were contrary to Orthodox Christianity. So that's a cautionary tale we should regard with concern as we backslide towards antiquity. As we read Shakespeare and his contemporaries, we should consider the all-encompassing influence of this fusion of public and private, of church and government. We should also note how Shakespeare chooses to contrast doctrine, and how he uses that contrast to make a broader moral argument. Shakespeare frequently juxtaposes Old Testament justice and the personal justice of pagan clan cultures, which informs much of revenge drama, with the grace of the New Testament, exemplifying his affinity for contraposition and his love of biblical allusion. In The Merchant of Venice, two opposing forces take their stand: revenge and mercy. Shylock, as authentically unlikable as he is demonized, represents the Old Testament's unforgiving jurisdiction, the law of the suzerain, while the witty and capable heroine Portia, arguably feminist for her time, symbolizes the grace exemplified in the New, the law of the Savior. The pound of flesh Shylock demands from Antonio, judicially upholding their bond and refusing generous recompense, is not only reflective of his malicious nature, but can be interpreted as parodied. It references the blood and flesh which Christ distributes to his disciples symbolically. Luke 22:19, and he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Mark 14:24, This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. This does not, however, negate the highly humanized element of Shylock, both as a Jewish character in an openly anti-Semitic social climate, and as an antagonist. Shylock declares to Salerno, If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Shakespeare's dark fable provides the nascence of a parable in pitting the personification of mercy against that of unmoved vengeance, bottomless material hunger, and punitive justice. Portia, the fair and forgiving, defeats Shylock, who then retreats, humiliated but spared. We may be moved as modern readers to focus solely on the caricatured nature of the antagonist and disregard Shakespeare's decision to show Shylock clemency in the end, or more importantly, to give voice to his understandable grievances, which makes him less of a monster when monstrosity was gratuitously ascribed to anyone who diverged from Westernness, whiteness, and Christianity, and more of a man worthy of empathy, pitiable, but not without personhood. In the court, Portia tells Shylock, "But mercy is above this sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show like as gods, when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy." Blinded by his odium for Antonio, Shylock reaps nothing for his unmanaged anger and animalistic inability to apply reason even for his own gain. It is worth noting that, while this is a characterization not to be taken lightly, it is also not the exclusive dominion of marginalized characters. And the message, while definitively doctrinal in its delivery, is not an inherently problematic one. Mercy conquers on moral terms. Vengeance, however, benefits no one. It is tempting to measure old literature against new attitudes, but it is not our place to arbitrate using modern values as our metric. Rather, we must consider work in the context in which it was written. This does not require us to inhabit a complex cognitive paradox in which inalterable facts and the fluidity of situational ethics coexist in a state of mutual instability. They are not incompatible, functionally speaking. It simply requires us to keep two thoughts in our heads at once. From a contemporary perspective, Shakespeare's Shylock is undoubtedly problematic, as are innumerable characters throughout literature, many of whom were well-intentioned attempts to humanize people who mainstream society had relegated to the realms of the invisible. It is well within our right to critique, but never to erase, these characters. They may be flawed in ways we are not prepared as a morally evolved audience to forgive, but they are mirrors to our past, and if we're not careful, to our future too. And someday we will face our own judgment as relics of our own history, presided over by the arbitrators of tomorrow, who will hopefully be better than us, who will hopefully temper justice with mercy. Like Shylock, we will need clemency for all the ways in which we've unthinkingly erred. We will need the grace that is given, not earned, and we will need the defense of context. Please stay tuned for more fantastic books and how to write them. In the meantime, just keep writing.